We're ready. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Chief Architect Network hosts Consultant Saying Things Live. I'm absolutely thrilled to have my friends here bringing my favorite podcast to our network and to all of you. Honestly, it's been a little bit frustrating posting all these great posts of, hey, look at what conversation we had this morning. Look at another one, and we can't really share it. So this was a great idea that Chris had to bring his show into this platform and allow us to make a little part of our network public for everyone else to enjoy. So post your comments on YouTube and on LinkedIn. We'll feature them on the bottom of the screen and give a chance for folks to react. And the topic for today is kind of a fun one. It's navigating our business architecture pivots in geopolitical storms. And I also really like this topic because we're live, so we really can't get that spicy, right? I mean, we'll see. All right,
Absolutely
so
false.
With that, I'll go ahead and leave you to these fantastic podcast hosts.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate it. This is awesome. So glad to be here. So we're live. We've not done this before. So in the cone of uncertainty, this could go really well, or it could, inshitify? What is it? Yeah, something like that. So, well, listen, this is Consultants Saying Things. I'm Chris Lockhart. We've got Whynde Kuehn, who we all know. I think you all know Oliver Cronk, who you may not know. Listen, we don't have slides. We've got something better. We've got a Phil Yanov up on the screen behind us. And the four of us have been doing this podcast now for quite some time. It's a video podcast. You can go look it up. There's about 80 episodes or so. And listen, I understand the theme of the event. Thank you for having us here. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about, I don't know if you may have noticed, there's been some geopolitical change in North America over the past few months. And like with all change, right? Change is going to happen, right? And I think it comes down to, well, how do we respond to that change? Can we leverage that to help us accelerate what we're trying to do in our business with our clients, whatever it may be? Business architecture is one of the tools, I think, at our disposal, right, that we have in which to really try to harness this and put our arms around it. So how do we navigate that? And are there some advantages there? So Whynde, I'm going to ask you, because you are an expert, well-known international expert at business architecture. So I kind of want to get your take on how can we leverage business architecture to help us navigate sort of this change.
Yes, and utter uncertainty in some cases. Yes. So a couple things from the business architecture perspective. One, and I realize that it's utterly obvious, but having a business architecture now up to date is a massive accelerant to deal with change, because when change happens, it's unexpected, it comes fast, and we don't have time to do months of archaeology figuring out how our businesses work. So I think that's the first point, is this is just a non-negotiable, having a business architecture, which minimally things like business model, value streams, capabilities, and the critical connections to things like business units, stakeholders, applications can get us a lot of decision-making power. And secondly, I think if organizations can truly become capability-oriented, that to me is a real key point here, because capabilities are our ability to put together the things we do today in new ways. If we need to innovate quickly, or do products differently. Thinking about reconfiguring business models gives us ways to strategically pivot. Or even just looking at capabilities, for example, to say, this capability was disrupted. Who delivers it today? What suppliers or partners do we have on it? And let's already be planning for backups on those things so that we can switch out and be really methodical about it.
So be prepared.
Be prepared. Okay. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. That's it.
And use business architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Phil, listen, you and I have talked over many cigars, I think, about fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? And there is some fear, uncertainty, and doubt going on here, right? And I know, there's only so much that we can do to affect that. I want to get your take on sort of how do we navigate that, right? Because the change is going to happen, right? Whatever that disruption may be, it's going to be there. So how do we respond to it, I think, is maybe more important, right?
Well, I think that the thing is that we're going to see is the disruptions are with the folks that we are working with, right? I mean, the
louder,
problem,
Bill. You need to be louder.
Yeah,
much louder.
Much louder.
That gain, boost that gain,
Does
baby.
that work? Does that work? That's about as good as I can do on my side, I think. Let's go that. So I think that the thing we need to be thinking about on our side is that the trouble we're going to have is with the people, right? So the people that are involved in the organization, they feel these uncertain times because they're feeling it from so different many angles, right? So I think that we have to figure out how we are going to help our teams navigate this and how, what are we going to do with those folks? Because we don't actually know what tomorrow holds. I mean, I think there's some weird advantages here, and maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. But in this moment, right now, you just have a lot of people that are concerned about their future.
What do you think, Oliver? I'm gonna pass you the mic, or do you want me to do this?
I'm gonna grab the mic. I'm gonna grab it. So look, I think this is the time when architecture teams get to sort of prove their worth, right? I think if you've got an architecture function that has become, to Whynde's point, a little bit too obsessed with the archaeology or not enough, quite frankly, if you don't have some of those foundational assets in place that can allow you to be agile and thinking about how the business pivots in response to what's happening. Because I think there's this really nice term that Gartner coined, which is like winning in the turns. I don't know if anyone's come across this, right? It's like, actually, when things are difficult, when times are testing, it's actually the right time to be thinking about how do you come out of the corner accelerating rather than spinning out into the edge of the racetrack, right? How do you stay on the course? How do you come out of that bend stronger? And I think there's a number of things at the moment they create challenges, they create problems, but how do we also use them as opportunities? I mean, like to use the T word, the one T word I'm maybe allowed to use, the tariffs word for a moment.
We just cut out.
There's actually some interesting consequences of that, right? I mean, one of the things I talk a lot about, and I have on previous episodes of this podcast, is kind of sustainability and embodied carbon of products and shipping those products from overseas. Like actually thinking about what we produce in our country versus what the supply chain looks like, how long that extended supply chain looks like. All those sort of things are potentially, it's a blunt instrument, don't get me wrong, but it's potentially bringing that into focus, and that perhaps some products that are coming from some parts of the world are now going to be looked at differently from a financial standpoint. So accidentally, maybe we're baking in some of the externalities. So I don't, even though Chris might think that I have a particular view that's very negative on a lot of this change that's happening, I actually see some potential positives. I'm sure that's not by design, but it's looking for those opportunities, I think, in this situation. And like I say, it's how do you reposition yourself? How does the architecture team go, right? How do we move? How do we create the capability to kind of come out of this as a stronger organization rather than just kind of looking at the risk and the risk and the risk?
So for the next hour, we're going to talk about tariffs and no, but I love this idea. I want to talk about the people in a second, Phil, because I think that's really important. And we were talking to Penny Townsend yesterday about this very topic, right? And as leaders of people and how you bring them along. But before we get to that, Whynde, I want to come back to something that you were talking about, right? Because is it enough to just be prepared, just to have the plan? Or don't we also then have to react to what's going on? And maybe we have several plans and we have to choose the best plan to fit a moment. I remember a firm I used to work at, right? They had a whole service offering around being fit for growth, right? In other words, you prepare in the downturn for when the cycle turns up and you're ready to go. But that involved having several strategies because you can't predict the future, right? The cone of uncertainty. You don't know what it's going to be like when the economy comes back, or in this particular case, when things calm down. But I don't know what your thoughts are on multiple plans from a business architecture perspective.
Couldn't agree more. I think this does get to scenario planning or multiple strategies, as you're saying. And then, having an environment that is modular enough, as I was talking about with the capabilities, that we can actually move fast. So your preparedness is being ready to move, right? And configure in ways even that we haven't prepared for. I also think there is, and this ties in with what you're saying, Oliver, there's a big mindset in this to not just be ready for change, but to kind of be excited for it and embrace it. And that is cultural. I mean individuals and organizations, right? That is a muscle we need to build and practice. And so I also think part of that is not just embracing it, rewarding it, but thinking that way and getting leaders thinking multiple strategies or scenarios, getting people thinking, how do I play with all these business model options so they're here and ready to go as well.
does that risk, back in the days when we did, business disaster planning, and we had all these wonderful plans that no one ever exercised, and then when the shit hit the fan, none of them worked, right? Because you'd never tested them. So I mean, I think in this particular case, it's like I don't know how you can model these things, but how do you test the one of the scenarios? I don't know if you can, right?
I mean, I'm sure a techie would say digital twins and simulations and all this sort of stuff, right? But I think no. I think it's to your point. It's harder than that. But I think stress testing is definitely something that's worth considering, right? I mean, we think about that in technology, but you can also think about it in terms of the balance sheet and supply chain stress testing. I mean, I suspect there are many risk people right now going, God, I've been banging on the drum about the fact we need to have a sort of plan B, or at least think about where our risks are in our supply chain. And all of a sudden, risks have now become issues. And these people are probably going, look, let's double down on this and let's work out what our plan is. How do we kind of manage and control some of this? What can we manage and control? So yeah, no, I think there's potentially a techie answer, but it's probably too late for that. It's more kind of scenario planning and looking at the sort of prioritized risks and thinking what are the dimensions of those, back to the cone of uncertainty, right? What does the extreme view look like that's existential? And what does the other view look like, which is actually quite positive? How do we turn this into a positive? How do we try and find the happy path out of this? And how do we sort of avoid the negative consequences?
I also think the muscle to change can't be underestimated, because then it kind of doesn't matter what we put in. If we have the ability to formulate direction, get people to rally behind it, get teams to work together to execute it, I think that also allows us to respond. So
like in that particular case, it doesn't really matter what the scenario is, because we're so good at just change in general, and people are okay. Yes. The fear, uncertainty, and doubt is less, I guess, right? Phil, I want to get you in on this because I mean, I know you got stuff to say.
Yeah, well, thanks. That's what a toss. And you can hear me, okay, right? Yeah.
Go.
No, but I mean, I want to come back to Whynde on this too. Is to say that I think there's an opportunity here. When we get stress tested, this is a chance for us to determine what our values really are as an organization. And I'm thinking that maybe, we know that we build resilience in ourselves, we build resilience in our organizations by doing things, by figuring out what our values are and then acting in accordance with those values, right? And so in this spot, here's a chance to go, oh my gosh, we're going to have to toss one of these projects overboard. Now we have to decide what is in fact important to us. I mean, there are things we did when we had more resources, but we're now potentially resource constrained. Isn't this an opportunity for us to clarify a little bit?
Like reduce tech debt, maybe? Right? We're not.
Just throw it over. What a great opportunity to clean this stuff out, right?
Now, I know you were part of the original design team for Lotus Notes, so I just wanted to.
Wow, that is throwing a guy under a bus, but only a third of the room will get the joke. Yeah.
The room is dying. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Oh, we're in London. So it was a red double decker. So
yeah.
I do want to talk about the people part of this, right? Because I mean, look. You can't be ready for change unless your people are going to come along with you. And even the leaders that are out there on the happy path, the happy trail. What do you call it? The happy path. Of the people out there on the happy path, right? They're like, oh, this change is the greatest change that we have. We're going to take the organization. We're going to do this. It's going to be amazing. AI is going to run everything. We're going to have the best of everything. Even if everyone sort of believes that, you still have the people in their heart, right? They're like, I don't know about this, right? And then you go to the town hall and the CEO is like, oh, anyone ask any question you want. Of course, no one asks any questions, right? Because you're afraid. And I think really in their hearts, the question is, is my job going to go away as part of this change, whatever the change may be? Even if the change is rehearsed and understood and known and planned, it's still sort of this, I don't know, like how do you bring people along? If you're a leader, or if you're a consultant dealing with your clients, that especially, right? When you sit down, whoa, what do you say you do here, right? Well, Bob, and then you're there to fire people. That's the ultimate, and people I think are afraid of that in their job. How do you bring them along? you co-opt them? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's part of it. And I think it is okay as a leader to look at the team and say, I know this feels uncertain. I know that you don't know what comes next. Guess what? None of us do. But we're going to do this with the best of ourselves at this moment. And we're going to take our beatings as we go, and we're going to figure this out. And that is kind of where we are. So how can I be a good human in this spot? That's the thing I'm going to be working on. How do I solve this problem? And I realize that I don't have this spot forever. I don't know what happens here, but let's figure out what we can do for now. Hick it, nunk.
Ollie, do you think it's harder for technical people to sort of make these kinds of changes? Especially, if this is what you know, and I'm an Oracle guy, that's all I know. Oh, we're changing to whatever. Like that is a major shift, right? That's a knowledge change.
I mean, it's easy to sort of paint technologists into the stereotype of being in the cupboard, and afraid of everyone else and loving their code, right? So let's maybe slightly move on from the 19 whatever era that was. The IT crowd kind of stereotype. But no, I think you're right. I think there is a degree of people get very specialized in sort of technical roles. And I'm certainly seeing this, like there is different groups emerging, right? I mean, we can look at the change curve as well, how people respond to change. Like some people kind of experiment with it quite early and kind of engage with it and start thinking about it. And I certainly see that group of technologists for sure. And I also see another group of technologists that are like, yeah, I've seen lots of these hype waves come and go. I think this one will come and go. So, yeah, I think you have, to your point about engaging people, I think you've got to sort of paint a kind of hopeful vision. And I also might personally think the way you have to lead on this stuff at the moment is be human-centered. I think I'm seeing way too much narrative of let's just cut cost out, let's just do this. It's like, hang on, what is the point of all this anyway? We mustn't lose the human centricity in our society and in our businesses and in our organizations, because we do need to take a step back sometimes and go, what is the actual point of all this stuff? It's to like have a functioning human society, isn't it? So like some of the stuff for me is like either being pitched in the wrong way or actually doesn't have the right kind of outcome and intention in mind. So I think some of the technologists ironically are going, well, I just don't see where I fit into this, because I don't agree that I'm going to be completely replaced by this tool, because I think, don't get me wrong, some of the stuff's really exciting and potentially massive, but then we play into sort of some of the geopolitics around like what different countries are doing. And so, we've clearly got China sort of releasing lots of open source stuff. You've got Europeans doing some open source stuff as well. And so I think we are genuinely in a time at the moment with technologists where there are so many different options on the table. And yes, there's a lot of marketing dollars being thrown behind a particular narrative right now, and a lot of money going a certain way. But the reality is that this won't be a straight path, and there'll be different sort of journeys forward. So I think that's why that's why we're seeing technologists pick different tracks, because I think some of them are more cynical than others, and some of them have different experiences and different levels of risk appetite to embrace something new.
I mean, I think that's pretty optimistic, but right, I am an optimist as well. I know we don't always agree on that, but be boring if we did. Right, exactly. But where I was going is like, is this an opportunity, maybe, right, for folks?
Well, I think it is. Again, back to the accelerating out of the curve, not just for organizations, but for individuals. And I think as we have more and more change, hopefully we become more and more resilient and look at things that way. And just to echo what Oliver and Phil were saying, we did an episode during the pandemic and we had mental health experts, remember? Mm-hmm. And one thing...
I think I was on the beach for that one.
You were too.
You actually were.
You were.
For anyone who watches it, there was a beer count going on, was there not? And that was part of the show.
It was still a good episode.
How does Chris deal with mental health issues? A lot of beer, apparently, on the beach.
That's right. Modeling. But one thing that they said really stuck with me is how much uncertainty wears on the human brain. It's tremendously taxing. And so I also think that individuals probably feel uncertain about things happening in society outside of work and inside work. So I just wanted to echo what Phil said and Oliver said. We need to be human-centric. We need to have the honest, hard conversations. We need to actually be deliberate about change management instead of it always sort of being an afterthought. And Oliver, as you said, at the end of the day, all this stuff we're doing as organizations is for a human society. So we shouldn't really lose sight of that fact.
And it sort of echoes that whole idea, right? And I think we've heard it a couple times here. Like when you're dealing with technology, the question is not, great, what can this technology do for me, right? Let's go do it. It's so cool. It's what business problem am I trying to solve, right? And then what tool do I need potentially to solve it? And I think this is kind of echoes that, right, a little bit. Phil, we've talked a lot about, and Whynde mentioned, the mental health stuff, which we've discussed quite a lot. But, we've also talked about tools and frameworks that individuals can use to help mitigate that wearing down on the psyche, right? And I was wondering, I know you do a lot with the Stoics, and I was curious if the last time you talked to Marcus Aurelius, I was wondering if you could tell us what he actually had to say about this, or maybe some frameworks that could help with sort of navigating this stuff. Because we can't control some of this, right? We can't. Well, we can't control some of this.
We can't control anything but our judgment, is what the Stoics would tell us, right? But I mean, The thing is, how we decide about this, that I think that's right, and it is important. And again, I think inside of our organizations, we're certainly seeing people of all sorts, right? There are some who have got some philosophical stoicism sort of in their head, and they're kind of resilient. And there are others that have dragged every cloud in the environment on top of their head, and it's raining on top of them right now, right? And so for those folks, I think you kind of have to say, look, I don't think that part is helping. Yes, we want to do threat assessment. That's part of what we're here to do. I mean, we're here to make sure that the organization and we are able to be resilient in this moment. But I think you have to help people understand that, look, let's what we say, we started with stoicism, let's move it over to cognitive therapy. We need to move the locus of control from outside of ourselves to inside of ourselves. What is it I've got control over? Those are the things I want to be spending my time on, and I will affect my environment to the best of that my role allows me. But that's the best I can do, and it's okay.
Yeah, and I love that, right? Because it may be raining. There may be clouds. It may be raining, but it's not raining just on me, right? Like, in other words, catastrophizing it, right? Woe is me. It's how do you deal with that? How do you react to it? I think is where we're at with that. I want to wrap this up because we like to do questions, and we have prizes for the best questions to be decided by Grant. Since it's
for good enough questions, really. Let's not set the bar too high. For good enough questions.
Don't stress about it. It's fun.
Yeah.
Let's take this home, guys. What are you thinking, Ollie?
So I think the last thing you were just talking about just there hit home for me, because I have to say I probably consumed way too much news, and earlier in the year I got in a very downward spiral place about everything. I just thought, the world's just going to the S word. And it's taken quite a bit to sort of pull out of that, the other side. And it's, to your point, it's like it's stop catastrophizing. You have to sort of rapidly try and get through that change curve, recognize where you are on it, and figure out how you help your organization sort of pivot and move with things. Because you can't just, right now, you cannot stay still, and it's certainly not a time for just getting in a real dark place and giving up. I think the reason that I've turned a corner is I've started facing into some of the really quite challenging questions that I have, and I know other people have, and start actively trying to sort of poke at that. And I think that's what we all have to do in this period of uncertainty. Is let's poke at that fog of war. Let's figure out where the edges are and what we need to do differently. So yeah. But no, it'd be great to kind of get some people in the room and some online questions as well. So let's move to that.
Oliver, but just in your spot on Oliver's thing right there is like, the thing is, you learn, right? And I'm just kind of extrapolating on what I just heard you say, right? But you learned that, right, if you let the day and the world get a hold of you before you get a hold of it, it puts your head in a bad spot, right? So we normally don't advise situational avoidance to people, but this is a good time to practice it, at least in moderation, right? Don't pay attention to all of this. Don't let this come into your head. You understand where you're headed first before you let the world kind of tell you what it's got going on.
But it's about
that's my that's right.
Love those points. I think it's profound that we're all on this earth at this time, going through all the incredible changes that we're going through. We're human. We're never going to get right. We're never going to get it done. So I think it's embracing what we can learn and do and accelerate it out of that curve for individuals and organizations.
Yeah, I love that. And, I love all these bits about, you have to be prepared for change, because change is always going to happen, and it's how you react to it. And if you have multiple scenarios, because you have a cone of uncertainty and you don't know where the hurricane is going, right? So you have to have preparedness, right? And Phil and I last year, our part of the country got walloped with a hurricane, and we're 200, 300 miles inland. That doesn't normally happen. So that was outside my cone of uncertainty, right? But not the hurricanes, apparently. So, this was great. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Phil. We're going to take some questions.
We got one.
So, do we have any questions online?
We do, from Mr. Daryl Carr, a member out of Australia down under. So what do you think is the role of government in this rapidly evolving space?
Oh,
The bomb has been dropped.
No swag for Daryl.
No swag. Sorry, but hey, you got to drop a bomb.
Just, we're gonna...
No,
that's fine.
Okay, request from the room, no consulting answers.
We're just gonna drone Daryl down there. And
Nice, I like it.
No, listen. The role of government in change is, I'm going to give what I believe the answer is, and then we can discuss. But no, I think, look, there's the sort of the libertarian philosophy of get out of the way, right, and let me handle it myself. I think that works for some people, doesn't work for everybody. I think there has to be frameworks and, oh God, I hate to say this, but maybe agencies, right, or things that are available for businesses. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about businesses instead of individuals, but like businesses to navigate that change, whether that's small business loans or whether that's project management advice. Right? I have no idea, right? There could be all kinds of things that I think government can do, and I think there are emergency scenarios where tax incentives or rebates and all those sorts of things. So I think there is a role to play. Would be my take. And on to Whynde. No.
Well, I'm going to violently agree with you here. I mean, I think that there is a place for a safety net, right? I mean, we saw during COVID, particularly in the UK, don't get me wrong, the response to COVID wasn't perfect. It couldn't be. It was a reactionary sort of time. But, we did do a bunch of things to help small business owners and protect people's interests. And I think this is probably a whole separate podcast, right?
Yeah.
So thank you, Daryl, for the topic.
Yes.
We may well try and make it slightly less controversial, but I think we will recycle that into a good topic, because I think there is something here, isn't there, around, to your point, like how do governments not get in the way of innovation, particularly in times when there's change and you need to innovate, businesses need to sort of think differently, but at the same time, how do you not leave people behind? And I think with parking the geopolitics bit, the tech disruptions we're seeing at the moment are going to lead to a bigger digital divide and leave some people behind. And is that okay? I mean, some people, they'll be like, they're okay with it because they're selling products to the people that aren't being left behind. But for me, I kind of recognize my privilege and recognize that I'm very fortunate that I understand a lot of these technologies and I have a reasonable idea of where my career will go. There are many people that aren't even aware of these technologies that are going to come for their jobs. And is it fair that they will all of a sudden be out of employment and will need to retrain, and what safety net is going to be available for them? So I think we'll never fully agree probably on this topic, but I certainly agree with the safety net.
Mm-hmm. Same, absolutely. Role for government, role for all sectors. They provide great balances. I used to live in the States. I now live in Scandinavia. I see different values, different things at the center. So it's what society are you creating, and then you put those different sectors, I think, in balance appropriately to achieve it.
Phil, is it about what you value? Do you think would that be your answer?
Well, I think in this moment, right? If we, good news. Lots of philosophers have discussed the role of government. We can go back and look at lots of patterns. But the thing I think we see right now is I would intuit that one of the roles of the government is to provide a stable and understandable playing field for which we can do our business. And that is a thing I don't see at the moment, right? I see chaos when I think I would rather stability. I don't know what comes next out of that, but I would say that, I think that should provide for a fair and equal opportunity for us to do a thing. I get it. There's lots of ways for us to think about this. I think, Michael Sandel's talking about justice at Harvard University. That's an excellent way to kind of think about what are the things we're trying to get done? What do we want to have happen? And this is the conversation we're having right now.
Well, that was good. Are you taking a picture?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah.
Time for a question from the room.
Yeah, let's take a question from the room.
All right, who's our first brave soul?
Brian's got the microphone.
Michael.
No questions.
Mr. Michael.
All right.
Michael, you got a prize at the last one.
I did.
All right.
I even better. I think this one's even a better question than that one. We'll see though.
Thank you for being a repeat offender.
Or it's not going to be good.
You got a bar to meet. Let's
I
see.
got a bar.
This is-
Okay.
Yeah.
Some would say we currently live in an age where technology is politics. Not to make a specific reference, but I've heard this term uttered more than once in the media. So let's take that as a given. What are like the top 3 use cases for this current age that we live in, where technology is politics, that can benefit from leveraging the techniques of business architecture, since that's the topic, right, for this panel. And mostly, I guess, that question directed to Whynde.
Yeah, thank you.
But I think
I didn't have an answer. So
When did you like the question? I mean, do you feel it was prize-worthy?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I mean, you got to tighten it up if you want a prize.
let's get ChatGPT to summarize that.
Yeah. I said it's harder when
Technology is politics, and how does business architecture help with use cases?
I'm trying to be diplomatic about the setup, but it's hard.
Just go for it.
It's hard in this case. Well, so how can you? Let me reframe it. How can you best what are like the top use cases for applying business architecture in the political realm, given like the current political environment that we're in? Does that help? Maybe it's
Wow.
I was going to say.
Okay, now are we prize-worthy? That's the most important
It's
question.
a
Let's see if
really
we got
good
an answer
question.
first.
Okay, so
We-
that's a yes.
We
You
might
got a
need
prize.
another episode on
Like,
it.
I was going to say, like,
I had to dance around the issue, but
Risk
avoidance.
management, impact. I mean,
Yeah.
we could take this so many different ways. I mean, even for the matter of closing down departments, what's the ripple effect? What's the impact? Like, there are so many scenarios, but I think impact, risk are some of them to get us started.
And I think this goes to the heart. I mean, Phil, you talked about stability. Government can provide stability. I was thinking more like maybe predictability. In other words, even if you're out there saying, look, shit's unstable right now for a while, at least that's something, right? And maybe I can't stabilize everything, but I can help you predict. It's not a magic 8 ball every day, right? Of what's going to happen. I don't know.
That's
Maybe
right.
that's a use case. What do you think?
That's
Okay, great. We got a thumbs up on that. Ollie, did you want to? Okay, so
It's dangerous territory
I'm quite pleased you took the mic away, actually. That's a really tough question.
and a dangerous one too.
We run a risk, right? For us at this moment. I guess you're getting ready for the next question, but I think technology is such a powerful lever, and we have so much control. And the high tech organizations, I mean, the big 3, they have so much influence on society, and so do we. The question is do we have this? We were talking about balance earlier. Is the balance in the right spot? I'm not certain that it is.
Mm-hmm. And I know I said this before, but we're at a point of time where I think we can rethink what we want out of societies and our human experience and craft these things around us, not just getting sort of swept away by some of the currents too.
We got a question from Richard, it looks like.
Thank you very much. So in the UK, there's a bit of a phrase being kicked around more and more around the end of the expert, the rise of the collaborative sense maker, and how do we start to use blueprinting, architecture to try and go after that with government impact on government's impact on what we're doing. Do you see that rise of the, let's hope so, collaborative sense maker is going to come forward and we will get there?
I gotta love it. I think that's prize-worthy.
I think that's prize-worthy.
Okay, all right. Here we go. Distributing. Yep.
By the way, these are little notebooks.
On its way.
Yeah.
With the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man is a generic consultant, by the way. He says he's got a Shadow Man, and it says "ask good questions," which we think is. I think that's a Yanofism, a Phil Yanofism. So, rise of the expert.
Collaborative sense maker.
This is my way of answering your question.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Because I think there is some expertise that I don't know fits well in a collaborative environment, but that would be my take.
maybe I can flip this slightly differently. I think it's the time to revisit expert systems. Let's do some failure recycling on that one, right? Because it feels like we actually now have the technology to help us build really good sort of guided expertise type systems. So I think I agree with you. I think the opportunity to sort of take knowledge that at the moment is, and there's a double-edged sword from what I'm about to say, right? To take sort of knowledge that's often trapped in a few people's heads and make that democratized, make that more available. But of course, the problem with that is that many people's livelihoods currently are based on having that knowledge, right? So there's a great book by, sorry, I forget the authors, but it's The Future of the Professions. Really good book, talks about what will happen to, education, what will happen to lawyers and all those sort of professional disciplines. And it's really fascinating. They kind of outline a couple of different scenarios. But yeah, I definitely think it's a time to sort of be looking creatively at how can we reimagine how some of these processes that currently rely on expert knowledge. I mean, there's a real life example I have at the moment because ironically, and as much as people talk about AI being really bad for the environment, sustainability is actually a really, really good topic for generative AI because there's a huge amount written about sustainability. It's a massively complex topic, nuanced for different industries. So each industry has a different sort of narrative on it. And actually, if you use generative AI to kind of compile and summarize that, as long as you use the right supporting technologies, you don't just do the classic sort of silver bullet sort of answer. You do something smarter than that. It's incredibly powerful. These really quite complex expert topics at making them more accessible to people. So yeah, I definitely think there's some really interesting opportunities in this space at the moment.
I do too. And yes, on the expertise and collaborative sense maker, I definitely think there's a rise of that. I think that's what we are as architects, certainly. And, this is not my quote, but, being able to make things by putting pieces together is creation in its own. That's highly valuable.
So write that down. There's a Whynde Kuehn quote.
Credited.
So let me ask that
Online
somewhat.
here, if it so interests the consultants that say things. Linda Finley has mentioned that the prior existence of architecture and architectural context is critical for an organization to navigate these times. When to your point about the capability lens, what is your advice for architecture in organizations where it isn't where it needs to be in order to help?
So the question is, what is the advice for architects and architecture to get where it needs to be?
They're not there yet, and they want
yet.
to help, but they have to kind of stretch to pull
When
it
do you
off.
want to take this? When you wrote a book about it.
Scare the business people.
What was the name of that?
Nice.
Not
FUD as a weapon.
strategy to reality.
Strategy to reality.
No, but joking aside, I think that we can use the situations like we have now to help business leaders understand why we need to have these blueprints in place and have them in place now, not when the emergency has happened. So I think it gives us good impetus all the way up to the board, honestly.
Is it training? Train architects up? Make better architecture? Better diagrams?
I'm never sure I'm actually going to be allowed to get the mic or not. So I think coming at this from the technologist lens, it's about getting out of the tech and getting into the business stakeholder and what's the outcome from the technology. I think I still see too many teams, unfortunately, that are still stuck in the tech. Don't get me wrong, tech's exciting, and I love tech as much as the next technologist. But we have to remember who we're sort of providing this for. And right now is a time where we need to be going and speaking to stakeholders and understanding their ambition level, but also their level of risk appetite, and then reframing what we put in front of them accordingly, right? Not scaring them with sort of really crazy out there things that are, potentially possible with agentic AI, for example, but are pretty risky, particularly in a highly regulated context. So it's kind of, I think it's about listening as much as sort of coming up with exciting potential futures. It's being a good listener, a good consultant, right, as an architect.
And I think for Linda is probably also thinking, well, how do we make that happen? I think we make that happen by continuing to talk about what should be done, right? Even if it doesn't always get done that way. And maybe that is, more forums like this, more forums like the Twin Cities Business Architecture Forum, other things, right, where we can deliver that message of it's more than the tool.
Well, we have a question from Tom, who's multi-platforming us. He's in the room and he's commenting on LinkedIn. Brian, could you give him the mic so he can kind of share his question?
Tom, is that one of your tools in your platform? Is that
multi-platform,
like a tweet deck? Is that?
So isn't predictability counter to politics? To your point before where you said, unpredictability, how we can get rid of it. It's a bit sarcastic, obviously, but history shows us that government direction changes, the political climate changes. So causing unpredictability. So isn't this actually, I think when you have this point, right, we need to be prepared for change. So you want the government to be more predictable, but I think that's not an option. Historically, it doesn't work that way. So isn't a better stance to be, hey, life is unpredictable, we need to be ready for change? Isn't that the better approach?
I think it is. I'm going to pass this off, but you just predicted the political change. You just said every 4 years it changes, right? In other words, there is some level of predictability. It's not a jump ball, and that was a basketball reference, but
the thing I actually worry about, particularly for us in this in the room and online who are in the Western sort of world, is that not all political schemes are short term for 4 or 5 year, right? And what we're currently, I think, facing into partly is we have different political schemes, some who are able to plan over far longer time horizons, right? And so look at China; they have crazy long-term, investment and sort of R&D. They have entire cities, for example, dedicated to quantum technologies. So, we don't have a symmetrical sort of situation in many cases, and I think sometimes we're not facing into that enough and going, democracy comes at a cost, which is, to your point, a degree of unpredictability because we have 4 to 5 year cycles. But there are certain topics which actually need a longer term planning horizon, and some parts of the world are getting better at maybe doing some of that because they're able to. Okay, we wouldn't agree with their human rights position perhaps, but they are able to plan on far longer time horizons. I think we do need to. So part of looking at this sort of geopolitical picture is sort of taking that into account that not everything is created equal here, and so that's certainly something certain industries are going to be facing into a lot more. Like automotive is definitely about to fill, or is already filling, the force of Chinese massive investment in EV technology. We're going to see the same play out with AI. We're going to see America and China and other states that have invested in AI kind of trade off that, and some of that is based on, to your point, the sort of political cycles, but also how heavily regulated they are versus they're not. So, yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a trade-off, isn't it? We pay a price for democracy, and that we don't have that, ultra long-term predictability. But yeah.
we want to stay on schedule. Normally our recordings go for a couple hours, and there's all sorts of stuff that gets cut.
There's almost 15 minutes worth of good stuff left when we're done.
At least, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just the introductions, and that's it.
Yeah, that's it. This is our cold open. Let's go ahead and get started.
Yeah.
Definitely not looking for a notebook grant for this, but it was to pick up on the political question about how business architecture or technology can shift. Maybe it could be even more radical. Maybe you think like democracy is about us, is about people and not government. And maybe AI becomes the government of the future because it synthesizes every single point that people are asking ChatGPT, mention online, and then eventually you get a potentially fairer representation of your views and you get action based on that. So it's not open to bias, it's not open to corruption or bribery.
So it sounds like a vote for the singularity, as I hear you say.
Well, it's just to think about, like, we always think in like, what do we know now, as opposed to what do we actually think we might know in the future.
Yeah. You want to take this, don't you? You've been binge watching Black Mirror.
Yes, we should save Sarah Connor.
So this is fascinating, and I was watching a panel recently with a lady from the UK government talking about participation in politics. And so, Brian, you raise a really, really interesting point, right? Which is, how can we reimagine our political process and make it more participatory, if I can even say that word? So yeah, no, I think that's a fascinating idea. And like what you almost laid out there is like that positive pathway through the sort of uncertainty. Like, I think we've seen a lot of technology recently perhaps be used in questionable ways around political campaigning or that sort of stuff. Social media platforms have clearly had challenging sort of situations to deal with around, how do they deal with content moderation and not look like they're censoring and choosing a side and all that sort of stuff's been really, really difficult. But I think, to your point, there is a flip side there, isn't there, where potentially there is a way of using distributed technology. I mean, like, as much as I'm not a massive big fan of blockchain or Bitcoin, some of the distributed sort of ledger technologies applied to politics could be fascinating. We've not really explored that. I think probably because there's a huge amount of money maybe to be made in that sort of idea. But certainly there's some space there for thinking, for sure.
Whynde, you want to tackle this?
No,
Or
just
Whynde
to
doesn't want to tackle
no,
this.
but just to say, I mean, thank you for bringing us back to like the tech for good, like the whole other angle on it. Even, I mean, even in a much simpler example, we're worried about bias, but we can actually get rid of our own human bias if we have everything designed right. So I just think it's a great call out.
Or if we let the AI just
So
get rid of us. Phil,
a piece of this, I mean, this is kind of a callback to, I think it was Richard's question, right? The end of the expert. It's what if the expert, what if we're doing this in a collaborative environment and the other entities are that much smarter than us, right? What if they are the sum of everything that has come before? Now what happens? What does that look like? I mean, we've not been very good stewards of intelligences that we think that are inferior to our own.
that explains our friendship, does it? Is that the?
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think we're at time. So listen, thank you, Grant. Thank you, Phil. There you are.
There he is.
Wendy.
Yep, that's her.
Thank you, everyone who's watching, and shout out to Linda and Daryl and the others out there on the live stream. Go look at us and watch our stuff. My kids need to eat.
It's true.
No, we don't. There's no money involved in this, right? This is just something that we enjoy doing, and we just like doing it. And we started doing it before COVID, before everyone else had a podcast. So it's been around for a while. But go to consultingthings.com. Watch some of the other episodes. There's just so much good stuff. There's a Patreon site if you want to watch the stuff that didn't make the final edits. Your mileage may vary.
It gets worse than this.
It gets worse. Yeah, and you can also buy merch. You can buy Whynde's book. You can buy all kinds of stuff, right? So check it out and tell your friends. And thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.